Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Listen, before I ask you how you're doing, I was hoping you could ask me how I'm doing so that I could say that I got this horrible ongoing cold and maybe some sympathy could well up in the hearts of viewers and possibly even in your heart.
Well, I think you've answered the question. Well, I got 3 hours sleep, so there you go.
Oh, that's about a dead heat then.
We both have excuses.
Let's call it a day.
It'll be amazing if we get through this. Okay.
Okay. What comes to my mind is Dick Cheney.
People seem to be talking a bit about that.
Yeah.
Noticed a certain amount of attention. He appeared on Brit Hume today and was more contrite than I expected. More contrite, I think, than you expected.
But now, wait a second, Mickey. We did have a conversation earlier today in which I predicted that he would affect an air of remorse, did I not?
But he did more than remorse. He said it was his fault and he can't blame Harry after his allies had been putting out the story for a couple of days that it was Harry's fault for not announcing his presence.
Well, that story didn't play very well.
No, it didn't. As Bruce Reed said, it's you blame somebody else for 3 days, then you accept responsibility, and when all else fails, you blame the dog. And they're on the verge of blaming the dog.
Yeah.
The dog didn't find the quail, so the guy had to go back and find the quail himself.
Yeah, I'm disappointed. I mean, initially my reaction was that this was just kind of, funny, back before the guy had the minor heart attack and everything, and I couldn't understand why left-wing blogs were kind of obsessing on the details of when he notified people. But then, for a moment yesterday, it seemed like the pieces were all falling into place for the possibility of serious trouble for the administration, That's I was imagining, like, 78-year-old guy dies, turns out Cheney was drunk, and by refusing to meet with police for another 14 hours or something after reporting the thing, he was actually obstructing justice because during that time alcohol was leaving his system and so on. But it looks like if that was my hope, I'm going to be sorely disappointed right now. Not that I was hoping that the guy would die, and not that I was... I was hoping Cheney would go to jail.
As a hypochondriac who filters every drop of water he drinks through a Brita filter, it can't be a good thing to have lead pellets hanging around your body.
No.
So even before the heart attack,
none of us really wants to trade places with the 78-year-old guy, or with Cheney for that matter.
Even before the heart attack, it seems to me it was not a non-deal. And the story about the one part of the story that everybody agrees doesn't hold up is the distance at which he was shot.
You mean that the pellets wouldn't have penetrated as far because it was just bird shot in a 28-gauge shotgun?
At 30 yards, a 28-gauge shotgun does not, I think, make a narrow wound the way a pattern of spray the way this one did. It must have been short. It must have been closer range than they're letting on.
Because of the pattern of spray. I mean, I haven't even heard any good data on the pattern. They say there's somewhere between 6 and 200 pellets, so thanks for clearing that up.
Apparently Josh Marshall's all over it, Fire Dog Lake's all over it. There's a good article by Paul Burka in Slate about what the Texas hunters are saying, and they're saying that no way that it was 30 yards. The other point is that, if suppose the worst happens, the guy dies and Cheney has to resign. It's not completely clear that's a bad thing for Bush. He gets to anoint his successor.
Condi?
Well, whoever it is. I mean, one of the great fears for Democrats is that Bush had the upper hand because Cheney could always quit and he could anoint a successor. Now, a guy like McCain probably doesn't want to be anointed Bush's successor because he doesn't want to be tied to everything the Bush administration's done. He wants to be able to promise some sort of clean break with the administration to the people who oppose the administration. He wants to have it both ways. So it's not clear that it would be a great thing, but it's also not clear that it would be a bad thing. If Bush picked Mitt Romney as his vice president, Mitt Romney might be a formidable candidate.
Yeah, although we're getting pretty far ahead of the game, I'd say, since the guy almost certainly is not going to die, and even if he does, Cheney's probably not going to have to resign unless more comes out. Right. I mean, don't you think? I mean, suppose the guy dies. Cheney, I don't think he has to resign. I mean, there is one thing that I do think needs a little explaining, is why didn't they just agree to talk to the police immediately thereafter. I mean, first of all, Mickey, you agree that's certainly a courtesy that neither you nor I would be extended, right? We accidentally shoot somebody while hunting, the guy's rushed to the hospital, and we say to the cops, listen, we don't have time to talk to you right now. Can you come back tomorrow morning? No way.
Did
right?
he actually tell the cops to go away?
No, well...
Because my impression is
Secret Service... Initially, the claim was that the cops were rebuffed by Cheney people. Then they changed. Then those reports were denied by the administration. And the last thing I read was something like an agreement. You know, the police agreed or something, or the sheriffs or whoever, to come talk to him tomorrow morning. Now, that's obviously not standard police procedure, right? Standard procedure is come over and talk to the guy right away. And that still needs explaining. And that's the one thing that still lends some credibility to the possibility that he had more than one beer at lunch, which is what he's saying now. I mean, it could be it was a late lunch and he had 3 beers. Could be he had the wild turkey flask tucked into the hunting vest. Who knows? But I would like to know why he didn't. I can't believe the cops called him and said, listen, we're busy. We don't want to talk. Yeah. I've got to think the initiative came from his side. The initiative
in a county with 410 residents, yes. That's probably correct.
I really don't think that they were tied down by rioting.
And there's been enough BS spin about blaming Whittington and the distance, and I don't quite believe that they thought that letting it out to the local paper was the ideal press management tool.
You don't think they did?
I don't quite believe that story.
I think they did. But the cleverness there is, look, she probably knows the people at this paper. Right. She calls and gets either a reporter she knows or some gullible young reporter, tells the story exactly the way she wants it told, and she knows, and Cheney was almost explicit on this point, Associated Press is going to pick up that very story as it's written in the local newspaper. And so that's the way it's going to first appear on the New York Times website and everywhere else, and that's exactly what happened. As dictated by this Armstrong.
But anybody with any knowledge of the sociology of the press corps knows that the White House press corps is going to be insanely jealous that they weren't tipped off first, and they are then going to go berserk, as they in fact did.
Well, they would have gone crazy anyway. What they got out of this was the first, 5-6 hours, the story was told exactly as they wanted it to be told. That's the way it showed up on all major websites.
Well, I don't understand what the first 5-6 hours gets them if the second 5 and 6 hours are relentlessly negative.
Well, I think the press would have been tough. And in any event, I think they were assuming, look, the Washington Press Corps is going to be asking all kinds of questions. And in my mind, this just reaffirms the suspicion that there's something we don't know yet. In any event, America deserves to know why. Whose idea was it not to meet with the police right away? Can't believe it was the police's. And why was that an idea?
Although it's possible that he admits to having a drink after the accident. It's possible that.
Does he say he had one afterwards?
Yes.
That's an interesting little grounds for explaining away future evidence.
Well, right, but it also might explain why he didn't want the police to come over, because maybe he was racked with remorse and freaked out, and as anyone would be, and he didn't want to talk to the cops right then. I don't know. No, I agree. I agree that we want to know more.
We want to know more, and we want to know now.
But I do think this interview went a long way, and the press overreacted, and in the end, I suspect this will not be very important.
Well, anyway, it hasn't been a public relations bonanza for the administration.
Except that it wiped off a bunch of negative stories that Jonah Goldberg, at least, speculates aren't going to come back.
Like what?
Wiretapping, for one.
Oh, that'll come back.
Well, they canceled the hearings. They may not come back.
That'll come back. I mean, meanwhile, David Letterman is doing jokes about how he didn't have a license to hunt, and come to think of it, we didn't have a license to invade Iraq.
If you go to Juan Cole's informed comment, he has about 10 of those.
I know, and one of them is that one. And when you've got mainstream culture, i.e. David Letterman, moving in the direction of Juan Cole, it is not a story that the administration really was hoping to see.
Juan Cole's list is actually pretty funny.
It's not bad.
It's certainly a humor high point for Juan Cole, let's put it that way. Okay. Hamas, our ratings magnet.
Oh, yeah. Between that and Brokeback, we can pretty much retire.
There was that Stephen Erlanger story That's what I've noticed about Hamas.
Yeah, it's lying around here somewhere, where he said that the administration and Israel were hatching this strategy to destabilize Hamas once it is in governance by denying it funds and making it collapse, basically, and then hoping that new elections would be called.
In which a reformed Fatah will take power again.
Right. First thing I'd say is whenever the administration starts envisioning one of these triple bank shots, they should keep in mind that basically everything they've ever expected to happen in the Middle East has not happened. I mean, they've been wrong about pretty much everything, including these elections themselves.
The Israelis presumably know more, though.
Well, if they do, well, don't get me started on that rant, but I mean,
okay.
Why, they have certainly not managed to solve the problem over the last 30 years. Not that it was an easy problem to solve, but as you know, in my view, the policy for the last few years has made things worse. And Ariel Sharon, it was as if he was trying to empower Hamas over the last 3 years, and I think what you saw in the election was the culmination of that.
I do think you've been slightly vindicated in that respect, yes. But because they gave Hamas credit for liberating the West Bank instead of Abbas.
One of several points I've been harping on, yes. So no, I mean, my view is that Israeli policy has not been in the interest of Israel's national security for years now. So no, I don't trust them.
I mean, it's very bad for the administration to say, well, we're for democracy in the Middle East, but we don't like this outcome, so we're basically plotting to get rid of it, get rid of the government. On the other hand, if there is a provision for early elections, maybe the Abbas will decide to call new ones, and I don't see why we're under any obligation to give money to people who we don't like. I mean, they elect them, we decide to write the checks. Now, they may survive because they have an anti-corruption bonus. A lot of the money we were giving to Fatah never made it to the people. So if they're not corrupt, a little money will go a long way with them if they can raise it elsewhere. But still, I don't...
well, as you know, my view is that what we should have done was recognize that there was no way Hamas, as a practical matter, can turn around and say they recognize Israel. And in fact, if we did coerce them into doing that, it would be so artificial and fake. It would,
well, right, but why can't we cut off the money and not expect them to endorse the right of Israel to exist?
Well, that's at least a coherent expectation. The question is whether good things will result from it. I mean, my view was you want to fudge the issue for a while and see if you can turn them around over the course of 6 months or a year, which I think would have been possible. In any event, Mickey, they're probably going to be able to get enough money to hang on from somebody else, and it's going to be somebody like Iran, possibly Russia. I don't see how we're going to keep them from getting money from somebody else. I mean, I don't know. I mean, of course, in any event, the administration is denying this story, and this is one way it was not a good story to come out from the administration's point of view. Is you had a State Department spokesman literally denying that there's a conspiracy between the U.S. and Israel. Those were his words.
Well, it may have been a preemptive leak, a leak designed to shoot down this horrible idea.
I think it was preemptive on the part of the Europeans, probably. But what the administration said, which may have been true, is there have not been discussions with Israel that Europe was not part of. And that may be true. That there were general discussions, and Israel saying, look, let's destabilize Hamas, and the U.S. is going, hey, that's not such a bad idea. And the Europeans say, wait a second, we're going to try to sabotage this plan. I think that's the most likely source of this leak. But in a way, the story, which is denied by the U.S., is, in a certain sense, a fairly straightforward extension of what the U.S. has said they are going to do. They have said, we're going to deny them cash if they don't turn around and do this thing that they're not going to do. They don't do it tomorrow, and they're not going to do it tomorrow.
But why is it so horrible if we deny them cash and they replace it with cash from elsewhere, which the stories I've read have suggested is not going to be all that easy?
Well, which question is it then? Are you asking what's so bad about them replacing it, or whether they'll be able to replace it?
If they replace it, what's so bad?
Well, obviously, then we no longer are the ones with the leverage. I mean, if they get addicted, you want them, if they're going to get addicted to somebody's money, you'd like it to be your money, because then you're going to have some leverage.
I don't know. Saudi Arabia might exercise some beneficial leverage in some respect.
Well, conceivably, but that's not the name I've heard. I've heard Iran, which under the current leadership I think will not be benign, and then Russia is kind of maybe playing footsie with Hamas. That's more likely to have a good outcome because Russia would at least like to be considered a legitimate member of the international community, unlike the president of Iran.
I mean, it's a pretty powerful lever. I mean, the Erlanger story said 1 of every 3 Palestinian families depends on this money, depends on a job with the Palestinian Authority, which is a pretty heavy-duty make-work program.
Yeah, but
for the Palestinians.
Oh yeah. Oh, the money is a lot, and so the big questions are: can they replace it? And secondly, suppose they fail to replace it or fail to replace enough of it, and there's a lot of hardship on the Palestinian side. Do you think that's going to have the intended effect? You know they're going to blame us in Israel, Mickey, and you know they're going to think in terms of a Zionist American conspiracy, and they're going to hate us more than ever. It isn't clear to me that that works out in Fatah's favor and against Hamas.
I'm generally in favor of honesty and transparency, and if we don't like them, we don't have to give them money.
We don't have to, but that seems to me like kind of a naive basis for deciding whether we do or not. That what? Your foreign policy is we don't like them?
My foreign policy is that if you have a negotiated settlement, it's going to be because both parties honestly assess the strength of each other and make a rational, self-interested judgment.
I absolutely agree, and you have to agree with me that if they did what we're trying to get them to do, which is succumb to sheer financial pressure and change their mind tomorrow, that would not fall into the category you just described, right? That would be totally fake.
I agree.
So right now our policy is we want them to say something, that either they say something that's completely meaningless or we starve them to death. That's America's policy.
No, you could cut off the money and assume that they're not going to starve to death.
But that's not our hope. I mean, I think the story was right to that extent, that we hope that if we cut off the money, they won't replace it, and Hamas will suffer. And I think that's confused.
Okay. Well,
we settled that one.
We settled
now
that
on to
one.
a real crowd pleaser, Mickey.
Yeah.
Brokeback Mountain. Now I'm going to forego the usual weekly ritual of reminding you that you predicted that the movie wouldn't gross $50 million, whereas at last check it had grossed $66 million. I'm not going to point that out. We're going to move on to a more substantive discussion, right?
Yes.
Andrew Sullivan, has he only implicitly or explicitly accused you of homophobia?
No, I think he's been explicit.
I think now he has been explicit.
He's used the word homophobia and he's said I have some issues with gays. I thought that was one of the things I learned in the process of heedlessly rushing ahead into this dialogue is, I was denying in a dialogue a few weeks ago that I was homophobic, even though I had a visceral, momentary visceral revulsion against when seeing homosexual acts. And then when you think about it, that is, by definition, homophobia.
Well, but the word is interesting. I mean, we need some clarity here. Don't you agree on what exactly the word means?
Sorry?
Don't you think we need more clarity on what the word means?
Well, why? It's like agoraphobia is fear of crowds. Homophobia is an aversion to homosexuality.
It's used. I mean, here's one way of looking at the question. Why is it that sometimes, to describe this general phenomenon of aversion / hostility toward, sometimes we use anti, as in anti-Semitism. Sometimes we use mis, as in misanthrope or misogynist. Sometimes we use phobe, as in xenophobe or homophobe. I mean...
Well, I think that's the question that this raises. I mean, homophobia in this technical sense can be a very temporary thing that doesn't imply you hate people, doesn't imply that you discriminate against them or not, tolerant of them or don't accept them as your friends or it's complete equals, blah, 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 blah. You need another term for what you really don't like, and anti-gay or some word like that. But it's a difficult issue because whereas with I always believed the '60s attitude toward racism, which is we all have a bit of racism in us.
Well, there's another term that's almost never actually defined, like sexism.
But the important thing is to confront it and hope one hopes wipe it out.
But what does racism mean? I mean, as long as we're on the subject, what do you mean when you say everybody has some? What do you mean by racism?
Well, I guess I found it's embarrassing to admit, but we
You don't have to admit anything. Just what does the term mean to you?
What it means to me, you notice somebody's skin color and you react differently when you see a black person and a white person in certain situations.
Oh, sure.
That deny their equality.
Oh, sure. No, look, if you're walking around at night in an all-white community and you see, a 20-year-old black guy dressed as if he's not from that community, you almost anyone does, in fact, whether they admit it or not, react differently than they do if they, see somebody who looks some white guy who looks exactly like he came from.
I agree with all that. I agree with all that, and I agree that.
But if that's racist, that's a meaningless definition of the term because I think that includes everybody or every white person.
Well, that was the point in the '60s that we're all racist, and I think it goes a little beyond just the statistical stereotype and into some sort of otherness. But the difficult point is, I'm pretty confident that otherness can be wiped out. I'm less confident that the otherness between straights and gays could be wiped out, even though we've got a lot of emails suggesting probably correctly that it's a lot easier to integrate the armed services by sexual orientation than it was by race. I think the sexual orientation prejudice is more persistent. But I could be wrong.
Well, with the military, you also have kind of unique issues, which is a certain amount of traditional male bonding among heterosexuals actually involves talking about women,
right? The way
heterosexual men talk about women.
Right. Now, they sort of have to rebuild their whole culture, but I think it probably could be done.
Yeah.
But I may be wrong, but I have to basically make excuses. Say I'm a homophobe to a little extent, and that's not so bad. That there's a distinction between that little bit of visceral aversion and what is to be condemned and fought against. Whereas I don't say that for race, so that's the difficulty I'm in.
Well, I'm actually kind of optimistic on both of those fronts, and I certainly think that any kind of queasiness that a lot of heterosexual males feel upon witnessing men kissing or something is the kind of thing that would go away if they saw more of it. That's my view. But I think, back to the meaning of the word, I actually think if I were a full-time gay rights activist, I would want to define the word homophobe pretty carefully because I wouldn't want to use it to stigmatize people who are in fact with me politically. And you're an example of somebody who's with them politically, I think.
But everybody I know is with them politically.
Right. Well,
I had a momentary aversion at the scene in Brokeback Mountain where Heath Ledger spits on his hands.
I haven't seen the movie. You mean you've ascertained that from them? They told you that?
It's at least 3 or 4 people who are politically totally liberal and think I'm completely out to lunch on this issue have said, oh yeah, I was squeamish during that scene.
Well, anyway, don't you agree with me that whatever the term's going to be, anti-gay, homophobe, it would be strategically optimal from the point of the gay rights movement to confine it to people who oppose the gay rights movement? I don't know.
Well, yeah, but they seem to want more. They seem to They seem to want us to watch Brokeback Mountain and not feel squeamish and embrace it. And
I don't know about they. You may be overgeneralizing from Andrew.
But
that's stereotyping.
Some people. Sorry, you're right. I was stereotyping.
But anyway, Andrew owes us an explanation. What does he mean by homophobe, and on what grounds are you one? And also, is it really wise to define the term broadly enough to include somebody like you who supports the gay rights agenda? These are our questions for Andrew.
I agree. He would do well to answer them.
He would, and we'll remind him of that.
Okay.
So what?
Iraq.
We just haven't talked about it in a long time.
Yeah. The latest is everything goes wrong for us. I mean, the secular people don't do well in the elections, and now the Shiites have chosen Jafari, who's not the guy we want, to be the prime minister. And the latest is that if you read a lot of blogs, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with that, and some hope that he won't be prime minister after all, that there'll be enough dissent in the parliament that they'll pick somebody with a sort of more overarching view, less sectarian view of the country. That's all I know.
Well, there was the one bright spot that Zarqawi seemed to be being squeezed out of the action by indigenous Sunnis. Zarqawi being the kind of more or less running the foreign jihadi shop, although apparently a lot of people under him are Iraqis, according to Eric. But there have been reports that he was being squeezed out, that there was conflict between him and the indigenous Sunni resistance. I heard a presentation from Nir Rosen, who is a fellow at the New America Foundation. This was a presentation at the New America Foundation. I was just listening in by phone. He confirmed that that's happening, but by his account, there's some limit to how much joy we should feel over that for two reasons. First of all, he makes the sectarian strife sound, at this point, quite advanced. I mean, the ethnic cleansing has been going on more than you would realize to read the average newspaper story, and he expects it to continue. He says he is sure that Kurdistan will separate off from Iraq, and that has involved and will involve ethnic cleansing to clarify that border. So however large a role Zarqawi may have played in fomenting ethnic strife, and he did play a role, it's at this point got a lot of momentum on its own. The other thing he said is that at this point Zarqawi has become an important symbol regionally. I mean, Nir fully expects Zarqawi himself to get killed by Sunnis at some point in Iraq. But he said the guy has, at this point, he's entered the internet as myth. He said that outside of Iraq, a lot of young guys have on their cell phones videos of Zarqawi's greatest hits, his greatest terrorist attacks, footage of them. And they, I guess, show them to each other and stuff. So his legacy will live on after he's dead, apparently.
Well, except he killed so many Muslims that apparently even Al-Qaeda told him to stop. But that's not to say that all Sunni Muslims are opposed to his killing of Shiite Muslims, even if, from Al-Qaeda's point of view, it was not optimal PR. That's a good point. The other thing I should say, although it's completely unverified, is I got an email 10 minutes ago with a whole bunch of statistics about, well, you probably got it too, it was from one of our readers, about how U.S. casualties are in fact falling quite dramatically just this month.
Is that true of deaths? What I've heard is that attacks are falling. Last time I looked at U.S. casualties about, I guess it was 5 or 6 days ago, they were kind of remaining at that roughly 2 a day level they've been at, more or less, for months, 2 to 3 a day.
This guy, the number of wounded has fallen more dramatically than the number of killed.
Oh, well, that's possible.
But wounded may be a better measure of how dangerous it is than the
That's
number
possible.
of
I was looking at deaths. In any event, apparently attacks are down.
So I still see, even Joe Klein that wrote a column where he didn't write off Iraq. A year ago, 2 years ago, Joe Klein was saying this is the greatest foreign policy blunder in U.S. history. Now he's saying, well, it might work. So I hew to my position that it's too early to tell.
Well,
which you ridiculed me for, I believe.
Okay, but I think there's a tendency to lose track of all the downside there has been and all the costs that the war involved. And let me give you an example nobody ever talks about, but which is very relevant to Iran. We were at a point where we had succeeded in getting UN inspectors into Iraq, and that was an amazing precedent, without equal in the history of the United Nations, in a certain sense. They were looking around. We could have let them continue to do their job and establish, and then indeed find that there are no weapons of mass destruction, and then there would not have been a war, and the UN's credibility as an effective inspectorate and as an institution that should be respected would have been strengthened. So now, imagine dealing with the Iran situation with A, us not tied down in Iraq, and B, that precedent having been set. I think we'd be in much better shape.
This is an old argument that keeping inspectors there
who's made
required keeping large portions of our army on Iraq's borders indefinitely, because as soon as we left, Saddam was going to renege on the inspections. It was only because he was looking down the barrel of a gun that the inspectors were there.
Well, fine, but we could have satisfied ourselves beyond doubt that he, in fact, did not have weapons of mass destruction.
There have been two interesting developments. One, there's some evidence coming out that he did have weapons of mass destruction. There are two, if you read right-wing websites, and there's a big conference today on it in Washington, there are a couple of generals who said, yes, we did have weapons, we shipped them to Syria. Now, maybe it's in there just to say that maybe not. But ABC also apparently is going to broadcast some footage tonight of Saddam talking to his generals about using weapons of mass destruction against Americans. So it's not clear that issue is about to be reopened.
He thought they did have them because people had been lying to him. So that itself doesn't really mean anything.
Right, but it's evidence. It's not maybe conclusive evidence.
No, I would say none of this is conclusive, and I continue to believe we'd be much better off with respect to Iran, among other things, if we had let the UN inspectors do their work. They were being allowed to go wherever they wanted, and that would have remained the case as long as we kept the troops there.
The other important development, which tends to support your side of the argument, and which has been completely ignored in all the Cheney fuss, are the new Abu Ghraib pictures that came out. Which will, I think it's insane. I think it's insane to release them, and I think they'll cause us lasting damage. And Andrew Sullivan has again been leading the charge here. Why is it so important to have these things broadcast around the world? We know that horrible things went on. It seems completely wacky that somehow we have to make them public.
Well, Andrew is nothing if not a First Amendment absolutist. And he
seems to be.
So he must be a First Amendment absolutist.
He seems to be consistent in the too much information department. Okay.
So now, a soon-to-be popular segment, viewer email.
Yes.
Where, so since we put that feedback button on the site, we've been getting a really quite a bit, and of an extremely high caliber, I think.
Yes. For example, the one that says, Bob talks over Mickey too much.
Now that,
and then
a
does
lot
not
of
follow
those,
Mickey's line of argument.
Those, but you know when those were written by and large, right?
They were written when a technical difficulty made it seem like you were interrupting me more than you actually were.
Yes.
And also made it seem like I was staring dumbly into the webcam.
And one of us ill-advisedly posted that, even though there was, in fact, a 2.3-second asynchronization between the two tracks, between you and me. I'm not going to mention names or point the finger of blame.
It's the dog's
And then
fault.
one of us cleaned up the mess the next day. But again, I digress. Now, Mickey, here's an email. I've got one. This guy writes in, the subject is get a life. The email says, wow, you really are stupid, exclamation point. And that's all it says. Now, Mickey, if somebody's going to try to convince me that both of us are stupid, they're going to have to provide a little more data than that. If the argument is that just one of us is stupid, I'm already sold. But I'm pretty sure this guy is talking about both of us, and this is just, the argument's just not strong enough.
I missed that one, but that's like, you get those emails every day if you're a blogger, Bob. You don't even
We've gotten
react.
surprisingly few. I mean, what's actually been striking is not only are the emails by and large astute, well-informed, coherent, but actually largely positive, too.
Yeah. We got a good one from NZ Bear, who's a prominent blogger. His website is The Truth Laid Bare, who says he had sent us an email saying we should explore what the Democratic alternatives were to the likely to President Bush, and he says, so I watched the latest blogging hits, boys, and let me see if I've got your answers straight to my question, who is the hope of sanity for the Democrats? Mickey's answer, John McCain. Bob's answer, Chuck Hagel, but only if it really annoys Mickey.
Not true. It's independent of whether it annoys you. And by the way, shortly after I said I could live with Hagel presidency, the New York Times did this big profile on him that I haven't read.
They did it before. I referred to it last time.
Oh, it had come out before, but I don't see the Sunday paper until Sunday.
Yeah. Well, I haven't read it either, so we should probably move off that topic.
I've got an email from a guy who saw the dialogue Eric and I did, in which Eric said that more and more data looks like we've had a kind of ill-advisedly lax policy in or broad definition of who we should lock up in Guantanamo. This guy says, it would have been nice had one of the blog heads, that's blogging heads, by the way, mentioned that some of those innocent little lambs released from Gitmo have been recaptured in Afghanistan fighting and killing U.S. and coalition forces. Gives us a link from the Washington Times. I'll post the link, but I would point out that that news is not inconsistent with the thrust of what Eric and I were saying, because it included the speculation that actually, and some evidence, I think, that putting them in Guantanamo, if anything, makes them more likely to resume or take up anti-American activities upon
because that
release.
argument cuts both ways. You could say that means they should never be released once they're in. Which is an argument.
You could say that. I didn't. You did. But
yeah. But I got an email saying, "Why am I so sure that McCain's going to get the Republican nomination?" It seems there's still a lot of opposition to him from the Republican-based conservatives and likely primary voters. Well, there was a poll at the CPAC convention in Washington, and while McCain didn't win, he came in a close second. So if he comes in, George Allen won. If he comes in a close second among conservatives, and he has, the center, it seems to me he's going to get the nomination. That's what I think.
I defer to you on all matters of horse race politics, Mickey.
Thank you. You're well advised to do that. But nobody else is well advised to do that. It's just anybody who actually follows this thing should not defer to me. But you should.
I'm in awe.
Because you concern yourself with deeper and
cosmic
more
vision is my domain.
Yeah, the meaning of life,
among other things.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Now we haven't on the Lieberman kiss thing.
Yeah.
We've gotten a few entries, and we're asking viewers to explain what Bush was thinking when he kissed Lieberman.
Right. Yeah.
We've gotten one person who agreed with you. I couldn't tell whether you were serious when you suggested that he was whispering in Bush's ear and not kissing him.
Yeah, it was a Fredo Corleone moment.
You seriously think he was just whispering in his ear?
I seriously think he might have just been whispering in his ear.
No, I think that's nonsense. We'll show the clip one more time. I'll put it in here. We'll let viewers decide and solicit more explanations of why the kiss was done, if they accept the premise that it was a kiss. I actually have what I think is the correct explanation, by the way. This is the first time I've revealed that.
Yeah. But I don't think it was a nasty thing. I don't think he was saying, "Joe, you betrayed me. You're a dead man." I think he was saying, "Joe, thank you for your support."
Yeah. Or what are you doing after the State of the Union address?
Yeah. But what's the what's your
I can't tell you. We got to wait until until we declare a winner or our failure to find one among the emails.
So this is like an end of season cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Cool. We're learning.
It is what I consider to be a correct answer.
Okay. Great.
So
I look forward.
So this is about as much talking as I can do with a bad cold. I don't know about you.
Same here.
Okay.
Time to get dressed and go on with the day.
Amen. See you next time.
See you.